Alright, so the last thing I need to do is turn on my ECU and start programming stuff. Now I'm not going to start the engine, but I'm just going to get as much stuff done before starting the engine that I can. And one of the things I was looking at was where this was connected to, and I wrote down EFI crank. Now yesterday I was messing around with the ignition switch and I'm like, why is the ignition on when I'm in ACC mode? It didn't make sense to me. Then I figured out I was in the wrong direction. Now you got to remember, all the cars I have now have all been push button for the last 5 years. So the whole concept of left is ACC, right is ignition, like it shouldn't be oblivious, but it's oblivious to me, right? Because I've been deprogrammed. So that started making me think, well, hold on a second. If this is connected to EFI crank is blue, and blue is the ignition side of this, and that's not what I want, because it's only going to turn on when I go to start the car, and then it's going to turn the computer off. So I need something that's on the whole time, which would be this EFI coil. So that one's an orange line. And then I started looking and I'm like, well, the EFI coil is what's powering my disabling wireless system. And so I was under the impression that this is actually wrong and not connected right, which I'm glad I'm finding this. So when we come over here, it says that we want switched is red and white. We got blue here and we got orange there. And then the other thing is, if I want to switch my fuel pump over to ECU control, then I have to actually go find the fuel line, which is this tan line right there. So I did a little digging, and the first thing we have, this is our disable wireless system, and the control line is this red line. And so here is our EFI coil line, if you will, and it's not really the EFI coil line, it's just a line coming out of my fuse box that's hot when the ignition switch goes on. So it's not dirty in a sense. Here is the red and white line that is the ECU trigger, and sure enough, it's connected to a blue line, which is wrong. It should actually be connected to this orange line. Then this is the fuel line for the ECU, the trigger for the ECU. And what I would have to do is, this is the rear harness up here, I would have to actually tap into this line here. So what that would do is actually eliminate the fuel relay that's built into my fuse box, and just have the ECU control from there out. Now, the only thing with that is my ECU will only control up to 10 amps on the fuel pump directly. Otherwise, I'd have to use a relay. Now you're saying, well, you could just use the relay that's in the fuse box. Well, true, except the relay in the fuse box is being triggered by the ground, and this actual wire coming out of the ECU is a positive. Now, could I program that? I have no idea. Not there yet. So I noticed with relays, you could do a lot of cool things and you could trigger different ways, but when you don't have a wiring diagram on what they're doing, because it's all built in. So for instance, there's nothing in this chart that tells me how this thing is wired in. We got a ground trigger and we have a positive out. And so if I eliminate that and put my own positive in from the ECU, we're good to go. But if I need more power and I need to trigger this, I don't have an input into this that's a positive trigger to make this thing work, because there's no information here. Now, can I take it apart and go, sure, I could, but it's already built into the car and it's upside down, so not good for my back, neck, or anything to be doing that live on the ground there. So maybe I add in another one or whatever. But so that's information I got to fire off to Factory 5, because I tried looking up the specs and I can't find anything. So I'll ask Factory 5 And if they don't have it, I'll get the exact model and then talk to Warboro, I think it's called, and get that spec from them. So otherwise, what's happening is my fuel pump will be running 24/7 when the car's on, which I don't know if that's a bad thing or not. So it just depends on how much that ECU regulates pressure by turning on and off the pump. These are areas of this build that I really don't know because I don't have that much experience with it. The only experience I have, besides regular cars and stuff, was my C5 Corvette. Everybody complained about the fuel pump because it's right behind the driver's seat and it makes a lot of noise when it's on. And that's about it. That's all I know. So my next step is to change those wires, switch it over, and try to figure out if I'm doing that temporarily or if I'm doing it permanently. I think I still need to do it temporarily because this is all going to be kind of wired up differently when I go to stuff it in the center console. So that's where we're at. Oh, man. Oh. So what you just saw me do was do the wizard programming on the like 3-inch screen that it comes with. And I got through all the nuts and bolts of the engine, and then once I started doing the electronic gas pedal drive-by-wire, that's when it started failing. So what I had to do was actually go, since I bought this system like a year and a half ago, I had to go and update the firmware. That gave me all the latest settings, and then as soon as I did that, it didn't fail anymore. And I could actually hear the throttle body like churning and moving and, you know, digitally moving back and forth, which was kind of cool. When the car's not on, it's freaking loud when you hear that stuff echoing in the garage moving. You're like, whoa, what's going on? But in any case, so what happens is this is the Holley Terminator X system. And what happens is the ECU itself stores all the data. And then once you program all that data, you could download it into the SD drive, which is built into the little handheld screen. Once you do that, and you could also upload back, once you do other parameters and stuff. But once you get it to the SD card, then you pull it out and you stick it in your computer, and that's where I am now. I have the Terminator X software on my computer, and I'm going to go actually open up a file. So I'm going to grab a new directory, find the SD card, Holly, save GCF, and then you could see here's my 33 number 2, which is the last one I saved. So once you open that up in here, now you have all these parameters that you could adjust and change. And one of the ones that doesn't show up is this IO. And so you have to go to Toolbox, Add Config, and then go find the actual file, IO config file, and it will pull up, and then it shows up in the top bar up here. So what are we looking at? So the reason that I have to bring this into the system here is you could do all your programming here, but what I want to do is the Terminator X system has 4 extra inputs and 4 extra outputs that are 100% programmable. So if I look at the pin map, you can see that here's my 4 inputs, and then here's my 4 outputs that I have access to. And so normally this would be like electric fan 1, electric fan 2, AIC kick for your air conditioner, and some other AC shut off or something like that. And I'm not using any of those because I don't need to. But I am using electric fans. So you can see that's green because that was actually there to begin with, and I'm going to go ahead and use that. The next thing that I needed was a speedometer output. And there just so happened that they had one automatically sitting over here ready to go. And so I was able to just drag that down here. And then what we created is my reverse light situation. And I'll show you where you create that. Once you create it, it shows up here, and then you drag it to whatever output you want. Same thing with my inputs. You can see that the only thing I actually needed to trigger was my reverse light input. So let me go, and this is why we brought this up by opening up the config, is we go over here, and you could see that I could just create whatever I want here. What type of input is it? Is it a ground? Is it a plus 12 that it's going to see? What is it going to see that's going to tell this to trigger? In this case, it's a ground. If it's a ground, you don't necessarily configure it. You just have to enable it. If it was something else, then you hit this configure button and you go through the area to figure out what you need to do. And I'll show you that in the output. So if we come to the outputs, and this order here has nothing to do with your inputs and outputs on the actual pin map, on the actual wires. You create whatever you want in any order here, and then you come over the pin map and you drag it into the output that you want. So you can see the reverse light configure. If I pop that open, it gives you, okay, so what actually triggers this? Well, the input, there's only one input, not multiple. And I'm going to trigger it from the reverse light input, which is a ground trigger, and it's enabled. So if it sees a momentary or if it's on, it actually triggers this thing. And then to actually, there's a sensor trigger that you could also use too. And in this case, we're using RPMs, but the RPMs are only above 0. In other words, it's not really about the RPMs, that we're just putting that in there. But we could deactivate it by actually hitting 1,000 RPMs. So what this allows me to do is the car's at idle at 850. I hit the trigger button, the reverse lights turn on, and then if I had to manually turn those off, I'd forget because I'm switching gears and all that stuff and trying to figure out where I am parking and all that stuff. And so I start taking off and my reverse lights are still on, which is illegal. So I have this automatic deactivation, and I programmed it at 1,000 RPMs. And if I need to change that to like 1,200 or whatever, I will. I don't think I'll be at 1,000 RPMs when I'm in the parking lot, but I could be wrong. So this is just a fail-safe that allows me to automatically trigger it to deactivate, and I don't have to think about it. So that's a really cool feature. So earlier I talked about possibly switching my fuel system over to the ECU control. And the more I talked with them about this, the more it didn't make any sense at all. Turns out that the fuel pump needs to be running full time while the car's going. And the reason that is it's not a pressurized system in the sense that you pressurize it and then when it needs more pressure, it gives it more pressure and turns on and off, on and off, on and off. This is an LS system is a recycling, I don't know what they officially call it, but it's recycling the gas. It actually goes through the pump, pressurizes through the fuel rail on one side, goes around loops to the other side, comes back to a regulator. That's where you officially set the regulated pressure, and then the excess goes back to the tank. So when I turn the ignition switch on, there's just fluid flushing in and out like someone, the toilet's still running type of thing. It's just going and going and going. So that's actually what's happening. So the idea that, I need to leave my car in ignition mode and not have the car started, and even if I did, I'm not burning the pump out because it's not hitting a wall of pressure. It's just flowing the whole time. So in all cases, it's really not that big of a deal. So I left this, you can see it's not enabled, and so we don't have to worry about it. Other things that you could do, there's all sorts of crazy programming you could do, but you could see when I first started my Wizard, it asked me how many cylinders? 8. What's my engine displacement? 370. If they were controlling my fuel pump, 5-second pump prime and then it turns off. But we don't need that in this situation. However, I do need to tell it what pressure are we running this at, 60 or 43? And so we're running at 43. What type of O2 sensor? All these different things are in there. How many pounds on my fuel injectors? What are the fuel injectors? And so a lot of this stuff, once you plug in one thing, it will actually bring up its mapping or whatever for that particular component. So it's pretty cool. There's all sorts of, I got a 24th tooth LS engine, not a, 50 something, 58. So I got a 24. And then basically, once you're done with all this, you could just come over here and say file save or file save as, pull out your SD card, go into the car, and you have to actually not just insert it in, but actually upload it to the ECU. And once you upload it to the ECU, all those triggers and stuff will be done. So I'm pretty much finished with this one. All I need to do is upload it to the ECU and I'm good to go. And then I could actually test my my reverse lights. Now I can test turning them on, but I can't test turning them off until I start the engine and we have RPMs going up. Now I could also sit there and say deactivate at 0 or whatever, but that gets a little tricky because it's at 0 all the time. So it'd be easier just wait until the car is actually running to test that part. And so that's it. I just wanted to give you a little bit, a little bit of an overall view that if you're just doing a few nuances, it's not too bad. The Wizard's really helpful. And then if you need to program an input or output, I called Holly Tech Support and kind of went through it because I just wanted to make sure it was right. And it's all good. But they have some decent videos about it, things like that. And it's kind of a cool system. Now, if you need more inputs and outputs, they have the, I think it's called the HP system that gives you possibly a few more inputs and outputs. And then they have the Dominator system, which gives you something like, 26 or 40 inputs and outputs. So if you're doing all sorts of crazy triggers on your engine for all sorts of things, and also I believe like suspension components and different things like that, traction control, things like that, then you'd want a Dominator system. You can program all that stuff. For Terminator X, this is actually the X Max, so it's actually controlling my transmission too. But in this system, very simple, straightforward. You could still do tons of programming, but that's way above my grade. So if I want to have someone come and tune this car, they would actually use this software, hook it up directly to the car with like a USB connection, and then they could actually drive around with me with a laptop in their lap and actually program all sorts of different things. Which one thing I would like to do is program 2 different settings into this car. One is like kick-ass street basically, and one is dumbed down street. So let's say someone like my father or someone, you know, I mean, it's kind of funny if you read the forums and stuff like that. Factory 5's like, don't let other people drive your car because they don't understand the amount of power that are in these cars. And of course, you don't have traction control and all this stuff, and it can be really easy to put this into the wall. And so what could be really cool is to just have a literally 50 or 60% less than full blast program in this, to where I don't have to worry about that too much. I could dumb it down for someone so they could just have fun, and actually, you know, I would be in the car with them anyways, but still, it's so sensitive. You got, for me, it's going to be somewhere around 450 horsepower in a 2,200 pound car, and that's like having 900 horsepower in a 4,000 pound car. So, you know, just trying to keep it real so people don't hurt themselves. So in any case, that's a nice little overview, and we are done with this part of the build.